characters mini lesson. So we're going to be looking at characters in literature, and then not just like the characters themselves, but how we can classify the characters in order to start to understand why the author included them in their story. First, we're going to take note of the important vocabulary terms you need to know in order to build a basic understanding of the character roles. First, we have protagonist, and we might have heard this word before, but protagonist is just the main character. It's the one the story revolves around, and it's the one who faces the main conflict. Now, sometimes stories can have more than one protagonist, especially if they have parallel plots or multiple perspectives, so they could have more than one protagonist. But it's whomever in the story that the story revolves around and the one that faces the main conflict in the story. Now, I do want to caution you though. Sometimes we have heard in the past that the protagonist is the hero of the story or the quote good guy, but that's not always the case. The protagonist isn't always the hero. It's not always someone that we pull for as a reader. Sometimes our feelings about these characters can vary because we have flawed characters, just like we have flawed people in this world. So sometimes we root for them, and sometimes we question them, and sometimes we might even dislike the protagonist, and that's okay. That makes for an interesting story, I think. But it's important to know they're still considered the protagonist because the story is told through their journey. Now, on the flip side, we have an antagonist. Now, antagonist is a character or force that opposes the protagonist. That means they go against them, the op, if they will, to the protagonist. And it's the antagonist's job to challenge the protagonist. They're the one that makes the story interesting because they're creating conflict. If we didn't have the antagonist, we wouldn't have any drama in our story, and it would just be a pretty boring story. So we need this antagonist in order to keep the plot going, in order to have that rising action and eventually a climatic moment. So antagonists, although we might not like it, are kind of important, very important to the story. Now, I want you to notice that it says up here, a character or force. I think sometimes we think that the protagonist has to be a character, an actual named character in the story, but it doesn't. The antagonist isn't always a person. It's not always a character. It can be a group of people. It can be society. It could be nature. It could be technology. It could even be the protagonist's own mind. Like the thoughts that they're struggling against, that can be an antagonist in the story. Isn't that a little different to think about how the antagonist isn't always a person? But it's true. If you think about it, sometimes people are facing some fear and anxiety. Think about the movie Inside Out. She was facing a lot of things that were going on inside of her mind. Those were the antagonists of the story. Don't worry, there's more. So we're going to factor this out if you want to bring a little math into it. The protagonist and antagonist can be broken down into different types of characters. So sometimes we have characters in movies that feel really real that you can imagine being friends with them, while others just seem to exist just to say a funny line and disappear, like those little sidekicks. So authors make these choices on purpose. Every character that they include in their story has a reason for being there. And not every character needs to change or have a backstory. If they did, the book would be really long, complicated, maybe a little bit tedious to get through. So some characters are there to drive the story forward, and others just make it interesting, add a little comedic relief to the story sometimes. So we're going to look at these different types of characters that the authors use and how each of them serves a purpose in the story. First, we have static characters. Their personality, values, and outlooks stay the same throughout the whole thing. These static characters often give like sidekick energy. Think of Disney princesses with their sidekick like Tangled with her little chameleon friend. I think its name is Pascal. Stays the same through the whole movie. But it's there so we can clearly see how much the main character changes. It provides some contrast for the reader. So an example would be Dory from Finding Nemo. She's forgetful and nice throughout the whole movie. I want you to notice that even though I say static character and their energy stays the same throughout the whole thing, that doesn't mean they're not important. It doesn't mean they're boring. They play important roles. Like Dory is super important in Finding Nemo, but we need her in order to see how much Marlin changes throughout the story. That brings us up to dynamic characters. So, with a dynamic character, their personality, values, outlook, they change and grow throughout the whole story. They give that main character energies. All right, this would be Rapunzel in Tangled. They change because of what's happened in the story or the lessons that they learned in the story. An example would be Marlin from Finding Nemo. He starts off fearful and controlling, but learns to trust and let go by the end of the movie. Then we have round characters, and I think the name pretty much tells you what the definition is. The reader learns a lot about their personality, background, and emotions. So they have layers to them. They have more than one type of personality happening at a time because we understand a lot about the character from what the author showed us. They feel real and believable, like someone you could actually know. An author used round characters so we can connect and understand their choices. Like we can connect to these round characters because we probably see parts of ourselves and parts of them. So we start to maybe root for them or maybe not like their choices. An example would be Nemo from Finding Nemo. He has multiple sides, and that's what a round character has. It has multiple sides. It's not just one personality trait because of their background and their emotions that they're going through. So with Nemo, we see he's curious, rebellious, brave, caring. He's not just one thing. So that makes him a round character. And on the flip side, we have flat characters. Now, the reader learns very little about their personality or background, but they're important. They show one main trait, like funny, mean, helpful, etc., and they stay that way the whole movie. Now, notice I didn't say boring. Sometimes people think flat equals boring, and I can get why the connotation of that word means boring, but it's not always boring. They can be funny. They can be helpful. They could show up for a moment, help the reader move on to the next stage in their plot, and then leave. So they serve a purpose, but we don't need that much information about them. So author used flat characters to support the story, but they don't distract from the main characters. For example, we have Crush from Finding Nemo. He's fun, right? He's an important part of the story. He helps them along their journey. He's chill. He's laid back. He helps Marlin, but we don't learn much else about him. We don't know his backstory in Finding Nemo, but we know he's a likable turtle that helps them on their way. So he's a flat character. So that is it. If you liked this mini lesson and you would like to go a little bit deeper, I do have it linked in my description below. So you can get the download of the mini lesson, the fill in the blank notes, the 4 practice activities that go with this. And there's a practice quizzes, or I think it's called Wayground now, that you can also use to help your students make sure that they understand these concepts. All of that information is linked in the description below. If you have any questions, just let me know, and happy teaching!